I'd like you to welcome David Hawks. He's going to talk about being agile versus doing agile. And the incentive for me to have this presentation was so many people talk about the rigidity of Scrum and how you're supposed to do it this one way. And I thought, wow, the word agile is not that, and that's so if you know what you're doing, that's not what this is. So David is an expert on agile development. He's been doing it for a long time, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Shot?
Yeah, you're fine.
All right, cool. So, yeah, I was asked to do this talk, and as I was developing it, I was starting to realize that the part that was being agile was all about kind of having a learning culture. So there's going to be this slant around developing an agile culture. So I'm David Hawks. I'm a certified Scrum trainer, certified Scrum coach here, based here in Austin, involved in the Agile Austin community. Was a developer for 15 years and kind of along my Agile journey figured some things out, stumbled into coaching and helping teams. So hopefully you'll take away a couple nuggets from tonight. And as you have any questions, feel free to stop me, throw out a question, and we'll just kind of roll along. So the first thing is, what do people, who in the room is actually working on an agile team today? Yeah. It's like, I'll tell you later, and you define agile for me. So it looks about half the group doing agile. So for those teams, what kind of defines agile for you?
Kanban.
Kanban, you're doing Kanban, yeah. Iterative development. What parts of what you're doing are sort of agile?
I'm also doing Kanban.
Doing Kanban? Okay, all right.
Kind of got a mix, but one of the big things that we try to really go for is the retrospectives, because you want to learn, like, kind of as you're doing things, what things are cropping up, so they can take away, as opposed to a lessons learned at the very end where you're like, oh, we could have done that 3 months ago.
Yeah, good. Retrospectives are key. We're going to talk more about that. I just met with a prospective client today and found out that some VP determined that the retrospectives were ineffective for them, so he just told them to stop doing them. Right? So how do you think that team's getting any better? Right? No, they don't have any real ownership. Yeah, they have no idea. They're definitely not talking about it. So it's like covert improvement is what they're doing now. So for me, there's kind of two elements. There's kind of the doing agile part, and that's like Scrum or Kanban, and Kanban doesn't have as many rules, but there are some rules to it. And so that's kind of like doing agile. We have a backlog, we meet daily, we have sprint planning, we have a sprint, right? We're doing all of these elements, and that's doing agile. I tell companies all the time, I can have you doing agile in about 2 weeks, right? We can go through and we can check the box that we're doing all these things. We're calling somebody the Scrum Master, we're calling somebody a product owner, we have a team, we did all the, the 5 ceremonies. Check. We're doing agile, right? But that stuff's probably the easiest part. There's a lot of nuances to it. The hard thing is being agile. So these are the 12 principles behind the Agile Manifesto. So you see things up there like business and developers working together, satisfying the customer through valuable software. Working software is the primary measure of progress. Lots of things that are hard to pull off. So self-organizing teams. You mentioned, the team reflecting and adjusting its behavior. So lots of elements that are more principles and values. At the end of the day, this is the stuff that's important, right? Are we learning? Are we improving? Are we getting better? Are we being, focusing on simplicity? Those elements. So we're going to talk more about that. So when we look at the process, and here's Scrum, and even if you're doing Kanban, you might be doing certain things along the way. You're just doing them in more of a continuous flow. So let's look at the elements and where are we doing learning, right? So when we're looking at the product backlog, we're talking about backlog refinement or backlog grooming or release planning. the team is learning about scope, and the product owner is learning about cost, right? They're getting estimates and they're figuring out and then making some decisions based on that. During sprint planning, the team is learning how to implement and doing some level of knowledge transfer, and the product owner is learning about the plan, the commitment, what can get done in the next 2 weeks. When we look at the daily scrum, the team's learning, all right, well, what'd you get done? This is what I got done. What risks do we have? What do we need to do today? So we're learning elements like that. And then at the end, when we get to our sprint review, we're sharing with our stakeholders and our product owner, and they're learning about the progress that we've made. And then we're learning, we're getting feedback, we're getting input. Hey, I like that, I don't like that. And this could be during a formal sprint review, this could be through like user acceptance or just beta testing or anything of that flavor. And then when you get to retrospective, the team's learning how to get better, right? What do we need to do? How do we need to improve? I didn't like how this went. That didn't make me feel good. Or hey, this went really well. Let's try and do that again. We're learning about how to improve. When you guys are doing, if it's Scrum or Kanban, do you see these types of emphasis on learning, or just going through the paces and the mechanics?
What did you do? What are we going to do tomorrow?
The robotic daily Scrum. Today I worked on Jira ticket 1, 2, 3, 4. Tomorrow I'm gonna still work on that ticket. Not blocked.
No roadblocks.
Yeah. Not blocked turns into next, right? Not blocked. Not blocked. Right, we're just moving around the circle. Yeah, a little bit too robotic. I had a Scrum Master the other day that said, somebody asked a question. No, you're not allowed to talk at the daily Scrum, manager. It's like, wow, that got a little rigid, right?
That slide we'll talk about this.
Yeah.
That can go bad though.
Yeah. So she and now at every and I didn't get to see how much people offended that, or broke that rule. But now I'm seeing that at the beginning of every Scrum ceremony, she's remind everybody, and there's people on the phone, that in this meeting only the team is allowed to talk. Nobody else. She's looking at the manager, right? So it's like, oh, okay, no tension. There's no tension with the Scrum Master and the manager. So the manager proceeds to just assign tasks directly to the team and not worry about the Scrum Master and product owner. That goes over really well. What elements have you guys seen that you feel like are implemented too rigidly in like Scrum or even in a Kanban world? Too by the book, not very flexible, or not very agile.
Yeah. Well, what that always kills me is the sprint planning.
Yeah.
Because like at one point, you plan your sprint, but you know at some point in time it's gonna break.
Yeah.
Because that's especially in game development. Like somebody's gonna come in and go, yeah, that thing you thought was gonna work, so not.
Yeah.
This bug takes 8 days, not 2. That engineer didn't actually scope it, or that designer didn't actually scope it. So within like 24 hours, I think it was like mini Gantt charts is the way I want to describe it.
Yeah.
I'm like, it is not mini Gantt chart. Somebody's gonna walk into your office about every hour as the product owner and say, not happening.
Right.
Or every once in a while, like 10% of the time, someone walks in and goes, so I did my entire sprint because I figured out how to do it in about 45 minutes. Oh, okay. Now you have to figure out what am I going to add.
Yeah.
So for me, sprint planning turns into mini Gantt charts unless I tell all of the management go the hell away for a few sprints and let me just.
Yeah, you're highlighting like two functions. One, sprint planning can have a lot of your sprint can have a lot of interruptions, right?
Yes.
Things that we can't plan, we can't foresee, and we typically recommend if more than about half of, or somewhere in 40%, 50% of your sprint capacity is being like interrupted and unplanned, then yeah, Kanban might be a better fit than Scrum. But the first question to ask is, does it really need to be interrupted? Is it a lack of discipline issue? Are we being interrupted because the manager just can't wait for 2 weeks and is like, hey, I had this brilliant idea. I want you to stop what you're doing. It was a high priority yesterday, but now I want you to focus on this other thing. Is it a lack of discipline issue, Or is it really true? Sometimes it is the case, like it didn't take me as long, now I need something else to do. Or 3 days in, it's just debunked, like there's no reason we should continue working on it. So that's less about interruption and more about a high degree of uncertainty that you have in your plan, right? So how much risk is, if we're saying that in sprint planning our number one goal is to figure out what can we commit to doing in the next 2 weeks? What should be our plan as a team? If we have a lot of risk in that, then the question is, well, could we do a little bit of work ahead of time to reduce some of that risk? Or or is it just going to be a high amount of uncertainty because there's a lot of kind of research and design elements to that?
I find the answer shifts from start to end of the project.
Yeah.
Beginning project, super interrupt driven. We went down to like 1 week sprints. It was that bad.
Yeah.
And then we went to like 2 to 3 week sprints, and then we had 7 to 3 week sprints. And the projects in the last 2 months. Because then it became more like kind of a production machine.
Yeah, you had less or more certainty to what needed to be built next and how you were going to build it, right? So you're also highlighting that in any subject, there's a lot of discovery. But most of our traditional plans, non-agile plans, assumed that we had everything figured out up front. We're going to talk more about that as well. Okay, so the 4 areas that I want to highlight today are the 4 things that I feel like are critical areas for learning. One of them we've just been talking about, which is like what's the problem we're trying to solve? Do we understand that? Do we understand how we're going to build it? And focusing on the outcomes we're trying to deliver. For you guys, it's like, all right, I want a cool game that people like to play. Some might say sometimes even addictive to play. So those are elements that we're looking for. The second area that we're going to talk about is as a team learning, which gets into the retrospectives. Are we improving? Are we figuring out how to be a better team? The third is how do we adapt to the things that we are learning? We are discovering things all the time, so how do we adapt the plan? Because the original plan isn't going to be perfect. And we need to understand that, and we need to have a culture that allows for us to learn and adapt. And the fourth area is around quality. The quality of code. Are we releasable? Do we know where we are? Do we understand the risks of our code at any given time? So let's jump in. The first area, customer learning, we're focused on what's the right product, what's the right thing, and one area that's really critical for me is focusing on outcome over output. So output is, how many lines of code can we generate? And too often, our teams and our managers are trying to optimize for output and like highly utilize. We want you, you have 10% available bandwidth, hey, let me give you another task. Well, 100% utilization isn't really our goal, right? What's 100% utilization of 35, right? Or the CPU on your laptop, right? It's not ideal. That's not really what we're trying to do, but too many managers think that's the goal. Oh, you have some extra bandwidth, I need to give you some work. So we want to focus not on output and optimizing to that, but optimizing on, happy customers, happy gamers, whatever our audience is. So the first thing, the signs that you're not really learning about your customers' needs are that you're not delivering on the value, right? Either you're not making money, you're not getting traction, whatever that may be. You have a lot of rework or quality issues once you release, so things are coming back like we thought we had a great product, and then the market told us no, we didn't, and we're having to kind of jump into that. And the third is that we have a lot of features in our product that nobody uses, right? There's a stat that in the software industry, 64% of the features we build are rarely or never used, right? So more than half of the features that go into our products, nobody cares about. And so should we just be trying to crank out more? Should we focus on output? Hey, give me more of those 64% of those features that nobody uses. Or should we be focused more on how do we build the right product? How do we build that? You guys probably in your space do some things like storyboarding and try and understand the experience and a lot of user experience driven stuff. We're going to talk about a technique that we've started to use called story mapping. But the main goal for it is for us to all get on the same page. So instead of it just being one person, it could be the product owner, could be the designer, producer in your world. Instead of one person going off and like figuring it all out and then just saying, all right, here's everything that I want you to do. There's some element of needing kind of a vision and somebody who owns that vision and drives it. But we all need to be on board and understand that vision, right? If you're going to make judgment calls every day as you're building a product, you need to understand where we're headed with that. So we want to make sure everybody gets a shared understanding of that vision, of those goals, and we want to make sure that we're hooked in and we're showing things frequently to get feedback to make sure we're on track, right? That we're building the right product. So one technique is called story mapping, where you've heard of the concept of user stories, where you're defining like who, what, and why we want to build something. Instead of putting all that in one list of a backlog, that's like, here's my backlog, and this is the first item, the second item, the third item, the fourth item, the fifth item, and all of a sudden I've lost context. I don't know if the 10th item is tied into the first item or whatnot, because I have this big list. This takes and it has a more user experience driven approach, where we're looking at from left to right, like this feature, and then these are the things that we need to do across the experience of what somebody's going to do, so we can then see and prioritize. The up and down is based on necessity or priority, so the higher priority things, and then we can sometimes draw a line to say, you know what, if we build this slice, that's enough for us as an MVP for us to actually show to somebody and get some feedback on it, right? To go test this piece of the game, right? Get those things and start doing it. So this starts giving us context for prioritizing. And it also gets the team involved in understanding kind of how everything ties together, as opposed to some, product owner figuring it all out, putting it in a list and just saying, hey, just can you work on this one story, right? And then you don't understand how it ties into the bigger picture. Another thing that happens is, that we have this fallacy of like mythical certainty, right? You're like talking about the Gantt chart, right? So we've all seen this Gantt chart that has, all right, I need 2.2 days of you, and then after that I need 20% of you for the next week, and then from there I'm going to need you for 3.3 days, and then we're going to get this feature done, right? And so it's like this mythical certainty that like we know exactly what needs to happen, and it's all laid out. And I used to be the brilliant, it was like this challenge to get the Gantt chart to all line up and all these things and all the lines, and then, I have this perfect plan. And the more I worked on it, the more I was convinced it was right? And then I get defensive about it. And then I go run around and say, hey, on that task that you had 3.3 days, what % complete are you, right? You're 2 days in. I'm about halfway. Yeah. I'm 90% complete. Right? I heard this saying the other day that somebody said, developers are excellent estimators. And I said, what? And he said, they're excellent at estimating the happy path. What we're not good at estimating is all the shit that's going to go wrong along the way, right? All the things that are going to break, all the things, but the happy path's going to work, but I didn't think about how it's all going to tie into everything else that I have, right? So we create this plan. We're at X, we're headed to this target, we've got this plan, and we head out in that direction. But what we want to do in Agile is, instead of managing to the plan and trying to resist any change, is what I used to do traditionally. Now what we want to do is go a little ways and then come up for air, see where we're at, see if we need to make, anybody watching Silicon Valley? See if we need to make a pivot, right? Right, so then we're going to head in this direction, right? Oh, that's not the right place, we need to go that way. We go along, we keep making some course corrections based on what we're learning, what we're figuring out from the plan, all the things that we're learning along the way, and ultimately we're going to hopefully get to a better outcome because of it. We could have managed the plan and we've been more predictable potentially getting to the original target, but that wouldn't have been the best outcome, right? So we want to make sure we're getting the best outcome, and sometimes that best outcome delivers in the same time, right? We could say we're going to take a fixed date approach and we're going to, whatever we get, as close as we get at that time. But in y'all's world, you can't do that all the time, right? You can't just be fixed date driven all the time. So this might, but you're learning, and you would know earlier that, yeah, we're not going to make that date, right? It's gonna drift off a little bit, but you have better visibility to that. So the key in this world is that up front, we think we're smart, we think we have all these answers, but really at the beginning, that's the dumbest point we are throughout the project, right? That's when we know the least information. But normally, traditionally, that's when we've made all the hardest decisions. We've locked the plan, we've locked the design, we've locked the requirements, we're fixing them. And here, really, we shouldn't be locking anything, right? We don't really have any information at that point. We need to start building something, we need to start learning from that, we need to start validating all of our assumptions. And so the key is we want to accelerate learning. We want to try and accelerate how fast we can validate, are we going on the right track? Are we building the right outcomes? The next thing that we can borrow from is Eric Ries's Lean Startup and Lean UX kind of approaches. And what he argued was, instead of us thinking about requirements as these fixed factual things, like we gotta go build this, and the more we think about it, the more we're convinced it's true. He argues that we should think about everything we build like a science experiment, like make a hypothesis. If we build this, we think we will get this outcome, right? If we build this feature, people are really going to enjoy it, and they're gonna play longer. They're going to do these things, right? So whatever that is, or it'll be an enjoyable game. It'll be an enjoyable experience. So, and when we approach it this way, the first thing we need to do is say, all right, what do we need to learn? What are we trying to figure out? The second thing we want to do is figure out how we're going to measure that it is actually an enjoyable experience, right? We can build measures into our product, so we can see, well, how many times do they do that? If they do it once, do they do it again? Right? What are the things that we could do? And then third, we need to figure out what's the simplest thing we could build that we could test this hypothesis. Sometimes it doesn't even require any code, right? Sometimes it could just be something that we do and we get validation. There's a story in around like Zappos, like buying shoes. Anybody bought shoes? I've actually bought shoes from Zappos. When he's got that idea, he didn't go build like a whole, I need to buy a bunch of supply, having a bunch of shoes in a warehouse and figure out how I'm going to distribute and do all these things. He wasn't sure if people would buy shoes online, right? When you buy shoes at the store, what do you do? You try them on, and then what do? You walk around in them, like, ooh, you might look up in the mirror, you're like, oh, how do these shoes look, right? And so he wasn't sure, would people buy shoes online? So what he did was he went to a local shoe store, he took pictures of the shoes, he put those online, he waited to see if anybody would buy them. If they did, he went back to the shoe store, he bought the shoes, he shipped them to people, right? But he didn't have like any warehouse. And then at that point, there was traction. All right, I'm going to start building what I need. There's also in the book, there's a story about Food on the Table, which is a local company. They didn't build any software. They just went and hung out and said, hey, would you be willing to pay $1 for this service? And they manually provided it. Like, all right, what would you like me to buy at the grocery store for you? Wrote it down, and then went and did it and said, all right, would you pay me $1? You go, okay, would you pay me $5? Right? And they continued to try it and work through all the process, manually before they built any software around it. A/B testing, all those kinds of things are all kind of in this realm of let's figure out what really our outcome is, and let's try and learn. So in this area around customer needs, it's all about we think we want this outcome. We think if we build this feature, we'll get it. But what we need to do is validate all the assumptions that went into it. There's a lot of risk in our assumptions. And so what we need to do is figure out what's the smallest thing we can do to start learning. And a 6-month window of we're just doing a bunch of development before we show it to anybody isn't probably the best way to do that. Now that doesn't mean you take it and launch it full public, put it on the shelf, kind of thing. But how can I get some feedback along the way, right? And some kind of validation, not just from the person who had the idea, but somebody who is more representative of the market. And I know you guys in your community, I mean, you do that, right? I mean, everybody in the company is a potential, audience member, right, or customer. So, okay, so let's move on to the next piece. Team learning, right? So we've already talked about like retrospectives, but here it's also about transfer of ownership. Traditionally, the manager was responsible for the process and how people worked and what people worked on. In Agile, we want to transfer that, and this was actually the last thing that I learned along my Agile journey as a manager at the time. I remember one of the coaches that we brought in, I brought him in to do training, and after the training, I told him up front, I said, we're really struggling with self-organization. Like our teams aren't self-organizing. And we were headed to lunch after the second day, and I said, so what do you think? You sat with us for the last couple days. He said, hey Dave, you and your managers are really curious and asking a lot of great questions. You guys need to stop. You need to just, zip it and get in the back of the room and let the team, create a void that the team can fill. And that was a huge moment for me. I mean, the biggest struggle with Agile is you don't know what you don't know. And so until you see it and touch it and feel it, you don't really know. And so there were points along my Agile journey where I thought I had it figured out. Oh yeah, I got Agile figured out. And then I'd read a book and be like, oh, yeah, I don't really know, all right, and then I'd go up some learning. Or I had that moment where he told me, I was like, oh, all right, we need to go try some things. There was one time when we did 4 2-week sprints, and I was like, we really got this figured out. We are gonna have a 2-week stabilization sprint at the end. Some of you might know where this is headed. That 2-week stabilization sprint turned into 8 more weeks, right? So here I thought, all right, we've got it, but we were deferring all of our bugs. And then bugs are, like you were hitting on earlier, we love estimating bugs, right? We can't estimate bugs. Bugs are
estimated, you can fix it already.
Right. Bug is by nature is a reporting of a symptom. Once we can't estimate it until we know the root cause, and once you know the root cause, it's done, right? Like it'll be faster for me just to go fix it than to sit in this estimation session with you, right? So yeah, bugs. That's why we want a stop the assembly line mentality with bugs. As soon as we find it, we fix it, because the more they sit out there, the more the risk just grows, and it gets more and more kind of unknown amount of work that's remaining, and it will just blow up on us in the end. So when we look at a team, some signs that your team's not really learning is that, well, first, the productivity's not increasing, but the team's frustrated, right? Their morale is low because they don't feel empowered. There's a stat that says 4 out of 5 workers in the US are disengaged in work. Right? Only 1 out of 5 are engaged in what they do. So let's think about that in like a development world. All right, we're really lucky. Everybody in our industry is really smart, problem solvers, right? Highly educated, even if they're self-educated or college or whatnot, but really smart people. If only 1 out of 5 are actually engaged in what they do, we're only using 1 brain out of 5. Like, we might as well be zombies. Anybody played the game like zombies? What's with the die? And then if you pass the brain, I forget what it's called.
Oh, zombie versus Scrum Master.
Yeah, there you go. That's even better. So we want to take advantage of all that, and the way to take advantage of it is truly to empower the team. Not just say you're empowered. Hey, you guys are empowered, you can do what you want. Oh, by the way, I need you to work on this today, right? That's not empowerment, right? Empowerment is action, not words, right? And our managers are really good about saying, you're empowered. You can speak up, you can tell me anything. I had a VP the other day, I told him that the managers are coming in and interrupting and assigning work directly to them. And he said, oh, I just put a blog post out to the whole company about how they should say no, that they're empowered to do that. I said, they're not going to tell their boss no. If their boss tells them that they need to work on it, they're going to say, that's bullshit. They should be able to say no. I was like, no, look at this. You got 100 developers out there that you're saying are the problem by not saying no, and you have less than 10 managers who are not respecting the process that report to you. Why don't you talk to those 10 people as opposed to tell the 100 people that they're doing the wrong thing, right? That's not being agile, right? That's blaming the wrong thing. So that starts leading to things like constantly swapping people around, right? Oh, wait, I got this new project. I need you to stop working with these guys and I need you to go work with these guys, right? What did that just do to this team? What did that just, it just disrupted 2 teams by moving you over. And then it starts leading to this specialization kind of world where like you're way overworked and you're looking for work to do. And you go start picking up lower priority things that then starts affecting QA folks that have to test lower value work, right? So we start having all of these kind of problems that tie together, partly because the wrong people are prioritizing the work and figuring out how to get it done, as opposed to saying, hey, you know what? You guys are all really smart, and you're closest to the problem. Why don't I just give you the problem and step away, and then see what happens, right? Now, at first, it might be like, oh, this is weird. I never had this happen before. But eventually, it's like, oh, this feels cool. Like I can actually take ownership of this. So we talk about team ownership, and I'm going to kind of highlight it in something called the Tuckman model. So the Tuckman's model is saying that all teams, when we first get together, start in a forming state. We're casual, right? We're hanging out. You know, it's kind of like somebody you just met. You may or may not ask them like, well, who did you vote for in the last election? You know, what do you do, right? We're not going to push on those kind of buttons. Some personalities will, but I would probably stay in that polite stage. And so think about some teams that you've worked on. Some teams stay in that polite stage forever, right? They never get past that. They're just kind of stuck in this casual world. It's easy, right? I mean, hell, our industry is filled with introverts. We don't really like people, right? We don't really like to talk to other people. So it's easy for us to stay sometime in the casual stage, but that doesn't actually make us the best team. That doesn't necessarily lead to us building the best product. So then we get into this stage called storming. That's when I actually step over the line a little bit, take a little bit of a chance, and then you don't like it, right? You don't like what I just did, and oh shit, I didn't realize that was gonna piss you off, right? So we're starting to figure out each other. We're starting to figure out what pisses you off, what you don't like, you know, how I should approach you. And part of it's because we don't have full trust of each other yet, right? You don't know that when I'm challenging you, I actually mean well. Or maybe I don't, right? But that's what we're trying to figure out. You don't know if you bring something up, if I'm gonna run to your boss about it and say, oh, Chad screwed that up, right? You don't know if I'm gonna throw you under the bus or if I got your back. Right? So those are things that when we're in storming, we're trying to work through that. We're trying to get to a connected state where we actually understand each other. Like it's important for us to talk about things like, well, what'd you do this weekend? You know, like who are you as a person, not like what your Java code looks like or what, you know. I mean, there's more to our identity than just what you know, oh, that's his code, yeah, I can tell. Right? No, it's like, what did you do this weekend? What are you doing? What are you playing? Right? Whatever that is, like we can understand we're connected to each other. That gets us into this norming stage. So norming becomes pretty comfortable too, because we understand each other, we trust each other. The hardest stage actually to get to, some teams never get out of storming, by the way. And you probably quit companies where you were on a team that you were stuck in storming. Like, all right, I'm done with this person, you know, right there, right? So then we get to performing gets us to a stage where we're committed to each other. I got your back, you know I got your back. And so if I start asking you or like, hey man, what you know, like the last 3 days you've been saying you've been working on the same task. What's going on? You know, in storming, you would react with, like, get off my back, man. I got this. In performing, we might still have some, there's such a thing called healthy conflict, right? We're arguing about something, but we could, you know, we could be fine, right? We're gonna work through it, we understand, we trust each other. I saw these two guys one time, they're at the whiteboard, they are just shouting at each other, just like, oh no, that's wrong, that's crap, you know. And then one of them looks at his watch and goes, oh, it's 12 o'clock, you wanna go to lunch? Oh yeah, sure. And they went to lunch, right? And like, no problem, no, they stopped their conversation. As soon as they came back from lunch, 1 o'clock, back at the board, you know, just you know, at each other. But they weren't performing, like they trusted each other. And they respected each other's opinion too, even though they were arguing about it. But those are the stages that every team goes through. And when we get to performing, like those teams, and that's rare. Performing is a rare stage. And some of us may never have been on a performing team. But when you get to performing, you can, sometimes those teams can deliver 2 to 3 times a team that's down and forming. With the same level of intelligence, right? The same, all those things, you keep them even. The performing team, that's their nirvana. That's the hardest thing about all this agile stuff, is building a really strong team. And that's why it's so critical not to break up teams, not to move this person over here, because as soon as I do that, we go back to forming. The question is, how long do we stay there? But say you were the glue that like was the comedic humor that whenever these guys started going, you kind of diffused it and we were all good. Well, if you leave, they may never recover from that, and we've just lost it, right? So those are even adding a new personality, removing a personality will start us all over, and then we have to figure out how to get back up there, and we may never get back up into performing. So those elements are what are key for us to get to these self-organizing teams. First, that the managers and the leadership are giving us the space, right? We're creating the void that the teams can fill, and they can take ownership of that. And then giving the team the courage, or allowing space for the team to have courage to try things, right? To figure out, and it's okay to fail a little bit, right? Sometimes not everything we do works. The question is, how fast do we learn from that? So those are all key things for these self-organizing teams that are trying to figure out how to be better. The other element is this utilization that I was talking about earlier. It's not about trying to keep everybody busy. It's about delivering the work. I was at a conference last month, and Kenny Rubin, who wrote the book Essential Scrum, he was doing the keynote. And he talks in his keynote about the baton. So if you think about the baton in a relay race, right? You know, we think about the people who are running and how fast they're running, but that's like our workers in our team. Think about the baton as the work. We want to focus on the baton, and we never want the baton to hit the ground. But in our world, if you think about features as batons, they're on the ground all the time, waiting on the next person, or waiting on the next release, or waiting on something, right? But we focus too much as a leadership team on trying to keep the workers busy and keep the runners running. But in the end, it doesn't really matter if the batons never get to the finish line. It doesn't matter how fast we're running if we never actually get it there. We don't get any value, we don't get any learning, we're not getting any feedback, we're not getting any validation until the baton gets to the end. So we want to make sure that as leaders, we're not focusing on like shuffling people around because you've got a little bit of idle time and I think you'll be busier over here. It's, all right, let's assign the work to the team, and let's make sure this team is empowered, and let's focus on getting the work to the finish line. So here's a common thing that we see with teams and assigning work. So we have a project, and we're going to assign work to Alex, James, and Jan. And then we have another project. So we're going to assign work to Alex, Carter, and Cameron. And we have another project, and so we're going to assign work. Does this feel similar to anybody? Projects or features, right? We're assigning work out to individuals. So the thing is,
How much productivity does somebody lose as soon as they start tackling multiple projects at a time?
So the stat that I've seen is 2 is actually not too bad because we might have some inherent weight, but everything after that you lose 20%. So if you have 5, you're like, down 60%. And at that point, you're not really delivering.
You're not even there at work.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's and if you got 6 or 7, it's all you're doing is churning. It's like these people I run into all the time. It's like, oh, I'm in meetings all the time. No, you're in churn all the time. Like you're trying to juggle so many things that you're just not able to get anything done. Now the other problem we have in this is that the leadership always says, oh, by the way, I just assigned you 3 things and they're all high priority. So if you have 3 things on your plate and they're all high priority, what are the ways that you're going to decide how to prioritize that work? Which items are you going to work on first? Easy, right? That's a good one. What else? Oh, do you really care about other people? Okay, stuff.
Jen does. I do. Members know. Jen does. I do.
Okay, so I'll put that in one of my favorite buckets, which is whoever's screaming the loudest.
Yes.
So you're just preemptively striking of who might be screaming at you. Yeah, I think it's my phone. And the other one is what are the coolest, right? Those are usually the 3 top ways that we decide what are we going to work on next. Now, one of the things that I say all the time is that that's a great way for us to run our companies, right? So our business people, the people that get paid the most aren't making a decision, aren't making a priority decision. They're saying it's all high. So then it's left up to the person who's furthest removed from understanding all the business priorities and the full picture to decide. And we are running the company based on easiest, coolest, and whoever's screaming the loudest, right? Yeah.
I don't want you to become a pop psychologist, but why do managers say things like that? I've never encountered one that has, but saying these are 3 things and they're all high priority, you are effectively deferring your ability to make decisions for the company.
Yeah.
And you're encouraging someone to turn into a weasel. Why would you do that?
Because it's easier, right?
Easier in what sense?
Because they didn't have to make a decision.
Okay.
Do you hear this guy?
Yeah, what I see is they have this fantasy that you'll just do them all at once. Like,
yeah, but is it just people that are divorced from logic or don't think through anything? Because it seems like people are bad managers in this sense.
All 3 of us want to talk to him, and we're all high priority.
It's also that they have a lot of things. It's sort of like you have things to deal with as a manager, and if you get assigned to somebody, you don't have to deal with that right away.
Yeah.
That's why I said easiest, fastest thing, because it's like I have a bunch of stuff to do. I want to shrink the number of things I'm thinking about all of them.
Yeah.
As a programmer, I don't know about y'all, but if I have 10 things I have to work on, I'm thinking about them all at least a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm going to want to shrink that down a little bit, just get it done. So as a manager, same thing. If you have 10 things you have to do, it's like just get them to this person, and I have fewer things to do.
And I think that's key is like managers, I think a lot of managers turn into just reactive triagers, right? So, all right, patient just came in, you got it, right? Oh, patient just came in, you got it, right? They're not, and also I don't think they can really assess, they don't have the tools in place to assess the impact of the new item that came in. They don't have the transparency. They should, Agile provides it, but they don't necessarily have the transparency to say, oh, this new item came in, and if I give it to you, it's going to make these other things move down the list. And they're not looking at all the data. And so partly they're just too busy because they're in reactive mode, partly because they're not taking ownership of the problem, right? Partly the middle managers are just getting it from above, right? The VPs are saying it's all high priority. Sometimes they're not challenging the VPs, even though the VPs are open to tell me if I give you project 3, how that's going to impact project 1 and 2. But if you don't, it's on you, right? And then the managers get stuck in the middle.
Well,
right, the middle managers.
I usually find also that like upper middle management gets distracted by their things. Because you remember there's like 3 tiers in a company for the most part, and you just try it more or less. There's like, I'm doing worker stuff, worker me, that's Alex the Will.
Yeah.
Then there's that middle management layer, and they're kind of that shuffle between the two, especially in the big companies. Well, in the big company, they're thinking about funding and budgets for the next year. they're not thinking about what's happening right now. They're thinking about 2015 and 2016. That's where their head's at. So until you look at them and go, dude, what the hell do you have to have, or the company's gonna fall apart? But in one thing, until you say that, they're just gonna be like, oh my god, I gotta have all these things because I'm thinking 2016. And they're not telling you, oh, I don't expect you to do it until 2015.
Yeah. But when I hear that, I think, what if not that are middle managers supposed to be for? Other than just to keep the upper...
Well, but also I think when they don't defer and let the team self-organize, then they're too busy doing the task management stuff that the team could handle themselves. And as soon as I figured out as a manager that step and like, oh, now I have time to be proactive. Now I have time to think about these things. But before, I was too stuck in trying to coordinate all of it and trying to juggle it all. And I was multitasking, so I was pretty useless too, right? So Agile takes an approach to simplify the problem, right? To say, you know, if we have these 3 projects, well, let's create one list for this team, and let's prioritize this list, this funnel, right? We call it the team's backlog, and let's assign the work and let the team figure out who's going to work on what, right? They're closest to the problem. They're smartest about it. This will allow the team to focus on things like knowledge transfer, as opposed to always trying to pick the guy that's the best to do it. Then it'll allow us to figure out, okay, you're busy, let's figure who else could potentially do it and focus on some knowledge transfer and other things with that. So in the end, we're trying to get to the single view and there's a forcing function to get the product owner role to get to this single prioritized backlog, which simplifies the chaos. But if we keep allowing the direct tasking, then we're creating a much more complex system that we're having to manage, which is causing a lot of overhead that then doesn't allow us to do it very well. So we've kind of talked about the management support. The third area is learning to adapt, right? So we talked about deferring decisions to the last responsible moment. It's kind of like, software is kind of like predicting a hurricane, right? And some of us have had projects that died in the middle of the Atlantic or went off, to La La Land. But we're trying to predict somewhere in here. So we have some tools that we might see, or we have some symptoms we might see. So we might be missing dates. We might not be meeting our expectations of our end user, and we might have to deliver before we have a quality product. So one of the things that when we did a traditional kind of waterfall process, and say we had this 5-month plan, we did a month of requirements, a month of design, we did 2 months of development, and then we gave it to QA, and so you're QA, right? Oh no, I thought I heard a question earlier. Huh?
Like the above.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Hiring QA.
Oh, hiring QA, okay. Okay, so at this point, we're 80% done, right?
That's when all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So if we were green all the way along, what color are we about a week or so into QA? Yeah, it's on fire, right?
Green. Right.
That's right. Yeah, red. That was like my 4 sprints and then 8 weeks of red, right? So what's happening is there's a lot of hidden risks that are going unchecked. All the bugs that we're not finding, we're not proving, and this just says like we're testing against the requirements. This isn't even like validation to the market, like some kind of beta or user acceptance or other things. And we're trying to get feedback. So we have all of this risk, and we don't have good options at this point. Either A, we have to delay, or B, we have to sacrifice quality. We can't go back and build less requirements in design and development. Those are all now sunk costs, right? Those are things that we've already done. We can't do less of those. So in an Agile world, we're trying to get to this potentially shippable product increment. We're trying to get to done every 2 weeks. Our code, we're going to rip it apart, and we're trying to get it back into a good quality state, fix any bugs that we found, and it forces us to break work down into smaller pieces so that then we can try and get some feedback on, we can try and get some validation. We have big problems. Some problems don't fit in 2 weeks from a it's something we would release. And that's why it says potentially shippable or potentially releasable. So we need to break it down into something that we can test and verify, but it might not be valuable enough on its own. And that's what we're trying to do and build in these increments of functionality. Get a little bit of it. It might be ugly, but it might be some functionality. There might be something you can test, something that you can verify, some part of the experience, some piece of it. And until we put enough of it together, we'll prove some more things about how it integrates in that. We're trying to get a little bit at a time and get to a known quality state. And this is where our principle of working software is our primary measure of progress, because we mean that. When we get to done, if we finish 4 of 10 features after sprint 2, we're 40% complete, and we mean it. Like, assuming they're all the same size, that estimation's a whole nother talk, right? Assuming they're similar size, we really mean that we're 40% complete. We've fixed everything, it's working. We could release it if it made sense to. It doesn't always make business sense to release something until we've got more of it. But we can actually get to yellow, like 4 out of 10, all right, I'm a little concerned. I didn't get to red, and now I can make some choices. If we get behind, we always can slip the date. That's always an option. It's not always a good business option, but we always can. But here, we could actually cut scope. And usually we're talking about depth of scope, not necessarily like major core features if we worked in value order. The thing that is a sunk cost now is quality. Quality is now off the table. That's not an option for us to cut because we've already tested, we've already fixed bugs, we've gotten it to a good quality state every 2 weeks. So that's what our goal is, and that's why trying to get to done every 2 weeks is important. You look skeptical. Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah.
I'm just curious how you manage bugs versus features. Normally when I'm working on a project, there is a process, we have little note card to do, but then we get bugs, and the bugs are in a separate list someplace.
Yeah.
But it seems to me as a programmer, like, it's stuff I have to do.
Yeah.
And I've worked with Jira before, where basically new tasks and bugs are all kind of in the same list.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations? Do you have any preferred methods for dealing with this?
Yeah, I would put them in. I would put them in the same list as well.
Okay.
Right. So there's two types of bugs to me. One, a bug that we find during the sprint before we've said this feature is done.
Yeah.
That to me is more like a subtask
Yeah, I'm talking about things
it.
you find later.
Right. So that one we should just if it keeps us from finishing, then we should fix it. Sometimes there's like something that that's a bug, but it's a severity 4. We're never going to do it. Then close it. Right. Then there's things that come up later. Right. We've now integrated all this code, and that's identified this bug. That should just get prioritized by the product owner with all the other work. Yeah.
Ultimately, it's like what is most valuable to that product owner or the client or whatever.
I've done it before where it's like 2 separate buckets, and it's just really, like I said, as a programmer, that's not helpful.
That's usually the product owner.
Yeah. Or the product owner that says, I just deal with new features.
Yeah. It's all the same.
Yeah.
You're the problem solver. You know what's going to go out the door and how it's going to work. I mean, nobody wants KS's going out the door, but at the end of the day, sometimes it just has to happen. Because someone's at the top going like, I'm an ideas man. And you're like, yeah, let's get back to reality here.
Yeah.
Well, I think you've sort of addressed it, but what about dependencies? What if there's something that comes up in the testing process that reveals something where if you don't actually fix it at this point, it prevents the stuff you're planning on doing in the next cycle from happening at all?
Yeah.
So you define that as, like you said?
Right, and those are things that we should be talking about in a daily scrum, right? Like, the daily scrum isn't about the robotic 3 questions, right? I mean, those are training wheels, that we're given, and then we all were doing it. The bigger question in a daily scrum is, what do we need to do today to stay on track? What are the right things to do? What is our game plan today, right? So that's what we really want to talk about. And so sometimes what I see is that people do the 3 questions, and then, all right, meeting's adjourned, we all answer the 3 questions, and then on the way out, we have a conversation back to our desks. That's the meeting. That's what the daily scrum should have been. right? That huddle, the meeting after the meeting, is really what the daily scrum should be.
All right, but then how do you know how much discussion there is? Because then it gets derailed. That's the thing. What, in your opinion, what do you, I mean, you find a problem, I mean, do you just identify the people involved in it and say we're going to talk later? Is that what it is? Or?
So one technique that I like to do is, I like to do kind of the lightning round of everybody, because it is, we still want that information in order to prioritize what should we talk about today. But if everybody if we have the right size teams, you know, 7 plus or minus 2, and everybody spends no more than about 60 seconds in the lightning round, and then you have a whiteboard behind you. And if you have something that we maybe need to talk about, we write it up there. We build, you know, the parking lot of stuff that we need to do. And then, oh, you know what, we got 7 more minutes. Which item up here do we think is the highest priority for us to talk about today? Right, yeah, what you're highlighting is one of those rigid interpretations that this daily scrum is not for discussion, right? It's just to answer the 3 questions, sir, right? Yeah, just answer the question, right? So no, we want to make sure that we're working through and doing some problem solving. And sometimes we might go through that list and say, all right, who needs to talk about this? And it's just you 2 guys. Okay, well, you go talk about that. Who needs to talk about this? It's just you 2 guys. And so we say, okay, after the meeting, you guys are going to go talk about that one. You got to go solve that one. Anybody that wants to join in their conversations can do it. We prioritize what we need to address. If we start, the reason why we have that rigid interpretation is that if the first guy thinks his thing is the most important and starts talking about it, or I think your thing is the most important, so I start talking about it, it may be that we never get to the last person's issue, and that might have been the thing that we should have talked about. Yeah.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but what's the most important part, right, for Agile in general? I mean, isn't it supposed to be, you know, adaptive value, right?
Yeah.
So then, I mean, based on your example, I'm just shooting from the hip here, but if it's valuable for everybody, you know, to just get in and out, then it's valuable to get in and out. If it's valuable for 2 people to have a conversation later, great. But if you're the scrum master in the meeting and it's valuable for everybody to have that, you know, full-on discussion, hey, shit's gonna go wrong or whatever, we all have to be in this conversation. You're not gonna go to that 15-minute, you know, 14, 57, 58, 59. All right, guys, we're done. You got to adapt to the situation, right?
So as a scrum master, I might ask, all right, so we've hit our 15-minute time box. What do we want to do, team? Right? Is this important? Should we keep the conversation going? Or who needs to be in the conversation? Because what happens is that meeting, everybody's there, and everybody feels held hostage in the discussion. So we want to make sure people have an out, right? Like, so it sounds like we need to keep talking about it. When do you want to keep doing it now? All right. Anybody that wants to stay can. Anybody that doesn't, leave. And that's part of why we also talk about standing up, the daily stand up. Because when we're sitting, sometimes we'll just keep hanging out, right? We're comfortable. But if we actually stand, it's easier for me to make a clean getaway, right? Like, so, but the main thing as a scrum master, I want to make sure the team's making a decision. And also, you know, if our daily scrums aren't going well, that's what we should talk about in our retrospective, right? Like, how's the retrospective going, guys? Do you find it valuable? Is it working for you? No, you know, we don't talk about the real issues, and I end up going the whole next day without understanding what I need to do. All right, team, what do we think we should do about that? Right? As the scrum master, I'm just trying to get the team to own that problem. Okay, yeah.
I do it a little even more fluidly than what you guys talked about, in that I try to read team faces to see who's getting annoyed by how long things are going. I don't specifically time box and watch the clock, because we get done around the same time every day. And just, even if it's in between, I kind of just let them have like a minute or 2 to have that quick little conversation about how they got derailed with the implementation or whatever. And I just watch the faces. As long as most of the team still isn't engaged and not getting annoyed, giving them an extra minute here or there, and they're all still happy with the process and not feeling like they're just standing around twiddling their thumbs and not getting shit done. That's really what makes them buy into using the process to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's key, because when you doesn't feel very empowering for the scrum master to come down with the heavy hand and say,
and be rigid about,
like Hey, no discussions,
Yeah,
right? And then it's like, all right, I'm never bringing up a discussion again.
exactly.
You know? I mean, now you start getting people that are just checked out. I'm like, fine.
And then,
I'm not talking anymore.
No, roadblocks.
Answer the 3 questions.
and when it starts to go too long or someone's starting to get fidgety, I say, it sounds like this is going to take longer than what we should be doing right now. Why don't you two meet up after? You know, I like then encourage them to end the conversation.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so time check. We got 1 more minute. We've had good discussion.
Speaking of time
I'm just gonna
box.
start. Every second I'm just gonna hit this button until we get to the end. No. Okay, so let's jump through this. And all right, we're on the last segment. All right, so the last one's about quality and learning about the quality of the product. Is it ready to release? Do we understand where we are? And so this is key about things like continuous integration and test automation, because we can't manually test fast enough and know the quality of the product. So especially this is important as we have more and more developers involved in the code base. So symptoms that you might not be learning about quality is your dates are slipping, you find bugs late, you have late integration issues. So let's think about it from like a needle in a haystack perspective. So if we have 20 developers making 10 code changes a day, that's 200 changes in a day. If we have a nightly build that's giving us feedback, we could have 200 things. And go back to the symptom problem we were talking about with a bug. Oh, the build's broken. So who's the person that comes in, whoever's the early riser that comes in the next morning, they have the unfortunate task of figuring out which of the 200 things that were changed yesterday actually broke the build. And they have to go dig in. Now, if we don't get feedback, if we don't have automation, we're getting feedback 2 months later, it could be 8,000 changes. And that's why late bugs are expensive. Because now you're digging in the needle in the haystack through 8,000 things trying to figure out, oh, yeah, I changed some code in that area, so I'll take that bug. And then I figure out, oh, actually, it's not something I did. I think it was something that Jim did. And then Jim's like, well, you're actually on vacation right now, so so who else gets? We have all these things that cause. It's like, what did I do 2 months ago? What was that feature that I was working on? And how much code did we write on top of that code? Right? There's all these things that make it really expensive. So we want to find things as early as possible. And so if we're not learning about quality, we probably don't have automation. We probably have lots of technical debt in our system, right? So if this is our theoretical capacity and we have technical debt growing in our product, right? Like things that are bad code, things that need to be refactored. It was designed right, but now we've added all this other functionality around it. We need to go fix it. It just forces us to get slower and slower and slower. There's a saying in the Agile principles about constant pace indefinitely, maintaining a constant pace indefinitely. Most people interpret that as no overtime. What that really means is keep your technical debt in check so that we can keep going fast, right? Think about when you first start kind of working in a code base, maybe not day 1, but maybe, in month 1 or 2, like we're going really fast. And then think about the thing you were maintaining that was like 5 years of code, right? And you're like, this is a pain in the ass, code base. I don't want to work in this anymore, right? The other thing is testing at the right level, putting the right level of automation in. Ideally, we can run automation locally in our dev environment before we even check in. Because then, if it's broken, we know exactly what changed. The one change that broke the code, it was me. But as soon as it goes into the continuous integration environment and 10 other people made changes at the same time, now we've got a needle in the haystack problem. So if I can start writing tests that I can run locally, like our first automation, all that record and playback junk was a mess because it was brutal. It was stuff that was breaking up here. It wasn't stuff that I, as a developer, would want to maintain or write or look at or run. It was expensive to run. So we want to write things down further in the pyramid as much as we can. Okay, so to wrap up, 3 minutes over. So what we've talked about is 4 areas here that are critical for learning. 1 is around customer, building the right product, focusing on outcome over output. 2 is around team ownership, continuous improvement, building it fast. The 3rd area is around adapting, so continuous forecasting. We have a saying, stop starting, start finishing, right? That gets into that working on too many things at one time, and then around quality, which is building the right product, focusing on craftsmanship, being able to release kind of at any moment or at least every 2 weeks, right? All right, so that's all I've got. We've got a couple workshops that are coming up. If those are things that you're interested in. And do we have time for more questions? Or yeah.
All right. How do you change the culture of a client that's always putting out fires?
The client's putting out fires, or the client's causing fires?
Both. More specifically, always putting out fires. So you have an agile process. You and your team have an agile process.
Yeah.
This client contracts you to do said work, and they run off of a waterfall process.
Okay.
You know that agile is going to work for exactly what they need because you know that they need it based on their requirements,
Yeah.
right? But they're always in the process of putting out fires. So there's never time. There's never time to change. There's never anything to do in it. So how do you creep that in there?
Yeah, I mean, you're highlighting that it takes slack to improve. It takes slack to try things, to learn things, right? If we're going 100 miles an hour, we can't figure out, hey, how do you change the oil? Teach me, right? We're driving down. So it does take some slack, but sometimes, what we need to do anytime we're approaching an agile change, right, or trying to convince somebody to agile, the first things that I'm going to ask them are, what do they consider to be the pain? What are the things that they're frustrated with? What are the things that they think are broken? And so if they say, you know what, I never give feedback. I always find out late what we're doing. Okay, well, let's talk about some agile things we can do to help that. Let's try and target, instead of just saying we're going to be agile, we're going to, implement Scrum, we're going to do Kanban. Let's focus on, we need to get releasable sooner. We need to increase our quality. And then once they're on board with, yes, we're going to attack that problem here.